Welcome to the Cultivate Church Planting podcast. We believe that the gospel is the hope of the world and that the world needs more gospel-centered churches.
We had just 2 years before, moved back from Australia. And so we just prayed, oh God, just raise up the right person. And so the long story shortened up here is that God made it clear to us that he wanted us to go. As an invitation came, which was totally unsolicited. I was helping them pack up the office of the former pastor's books and all that, and I said, "How's your search going?" And I was just concerned for my sister that this wouldn't blow them away or anything like that. I said, "Well, we've had some people come in, but we haven't decided yet on who. But we've heard that you've pastored before. Would you send us some messages?"
We think we found the right guy.
And then, oh man! And I said, "I don't even know if I have any messages to send you." Anyway, God put it together and convinced me in my heart that that's where he wanted me. And the very first Sunday morning, which was the first Sunday in June of 1997. I got up and I told the congregation, I said, "You're getting a pastor. I know I'm supposed to be here. I don't want to be here."
Oh, wow.
We love you too.
Yes.
We love you too, Pastor Bill.
I said, "But I know I'm supposed to be here." And so I am excited about that. But and I said, facetious, I said, you can see my heel marks in the desert coming across from Albuquerque. But I said, if God's not sending us back to the mission field, which I had hoped for, then he's sent me here to send you there. So get your passports in order.
Awesome.
Because I would be thrilled to have to close the church down because everybody was out on the mission field.
Everybody was out. So it was a missions-minded church. You've got a heart for missions. You got a heart for church planting.
Yeah.
And,
it wasn't at that time.
Okay.
The pastor the associate pastor who was there, Peyton Jones, he did have a heart for missions, but it wasn't built into the culture of the church.
Right.
So yeah.
Peyton Jones is the church planter himself and has amazing network.
He does.
So that's awesome. You were part of sending him out. You still support him and his network as a church?
Yeah.
Awesome.
We do.
Awesome.
We sent him to Wales, the land of the Welsh people.
Oh, that's right.
And we talked about this before we started recording, but when we first met him, because the congregation there and the leaders, the board had made their decision, and they said, "We need to take this to the congregation." He said, because the congregation's the one who pays the bills.
Yep.
So, and that's what Pastor Chuck had told them. You should get a buy-in from the church.
Yeah.
And so once the decision was made that it was us, Peyton and Andrea, we flew them out to New Mexico to meet with us, and that's where we found out that Peyton was born almost at the moment that my wife and I were married.
Wow.
So however long I'm married, that's how long he's been on the planet.
Wow.
So, and he had a burden for the
year
Welsh
of blessings.
people.
Oh.
Yes.
How old were you when he went out to Huntington?
When they moved to Huntington, I was probably like 20 or 21. Well, 20.
Yeah, almost.
We had
20.
moved back from Australia a couple years before.
Yeah, right.
I had just started dating my now husband. And when my family said they were moving, I said, "Well, I'm staying here because my boyfriend's here." So my sister and I
that
actually
conversation.
stayed.
Not with that
I don't
voice.
remember that conversation. I just don't remember
That kind of
ever.
sounded like a sassy voice.
Well, that would be
That's my
me.
boyfriend.
Yeah, that's my boyfriend. I'm amazed my parents let me live. So yeah. So I stayed. I was probably about 20, and then about a year after that, I went out to Calvary Bible College with Jesse.
Okay. And
Where
that's
we
where
met you guys.
Yep.
Yep.
We met Shannon and Jesse 4 years
25
ago?
years ago. We've been married almost 23
years.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
That's
We're
amazing.
old.
Wow.
Oy.
Before Refuge, before Calvary Chapel, Huntington Beach, Shannon mentioned that Australia. So I have a little bit of a history with you, and we've known you for a long time, since we were in Africa and as missionaries.
So how long ago was that? Was it 15 years ago or something like that?
We moved to Uganda in 2002.
Okay.
And we moved back in 2011.
All right.
So, and I don't know if you remember this, but I called you when we were moving back from Africa, and I was like, "Pastor Bill, I don't know what to do or where to go. We know we're supposed to leave."
I do remember conversation.
Uganda, and the transition happened there to another pastor and everything. but I didn't know what to do, and still young. I became a pastor there just kind of by default. The guy that led the church planting team ended up coming back to the States within that first year. And so I was 24, I became the pastor, and kind of learned on my own, but never had a mentor or anything like that. So I think that's why I was kind of reaching out.
That was me too. When it came to pastoring, I had models, but definitely did not have a mentor.
Yep. Yeah. And I read books and everything, but it's not the same.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you think, how important is that? Because we talked about mentoring in our Cultivate Church Planting program. That's a big part of it, is mentoring. Because a lot of these guys, they go out, they're called by God, they feel like we're gifted, we've got a team, but they don't have that connection to someone who's been there, done that, an older, wiser person. How important is that as far as succeeding?
I think it's incredibly important that you have a circle of, whether you call them a mentor or a coach or a friend. I'm at a point in my life where I know we're moving towards a transition at Refuge Calvary Chapel in Huntington Beach, and I'll still be in the body there and still a part of the ministry team, but I won't be as regular in the Sunday morning pulpit, the weekend pulpit. And but I really pray and I hope, and I'm planning on doing a whole lot of, I would call it friending, of just other people that are in ministry and need someone to come alongside of them and hear. And I think a mentor is a friend with a really clear agenda.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not a hard...
That's a good way to put it. A friend with a clear agenda.
I think as long as that person doesn't feel like a project. I feel like that is come in with pursue people for the benefit of that person. God has drawn you to that person. I think it's so important. I did not go after discipleship for myself until 3 years ago.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You mean to be discipled?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, I know what I'm doing. And do you think that a lot of pastors don't go after that? Do you see a lot of pastors who don't necessarily have that in place?
Yeah, I think so.
And I feel like there's a risk.
I think there's more
to that.
now because it's really become one of the topics on the table in pastoral circles.
You mean people are getting discipleship and mentoring?
I think, was that your question?
They're getting it more now?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe it's becoming more of
I feel like you did it the opposite way, because most people are they need mentors in the beginning, and then they're like, I got this figured out now, and they don't need it.
Yeah.
But that's wisdom, though.
But I realize I missed out. I see it now, and I'm like, man, and not just discipleship for myself, but also discipleship for other people, that I would be pursuing somebody else to disciple. Right. That whole I don't know what it's called, but having somebody who's mentoring you and somebody that you're always having that you're being poured into and pouring out.
And you do that well.
There's so much health, but I have not done that until more recently. Yes, I've helped people learn how to play instruments. Yes, I've helped people sing, but really getting entangled with people and
that's a different
getting
story.
Messy with them, it changes things.
And I had a conversation in Israel this last, which trip was it? I think it was the last one in
He's
November.
been on 3 trips and I don't know.
I meant to ask you about that because you're always in Israel. I look on Instagram because Bill has a great Instagram page. You're always on there. You're active.
I should get that page back. I think it's going to come back.
He had an even greater one with more followers.
Oh, man. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no,
He got banned.
He's going to get a badge and sew it on his jacket.
But I had this great conversation. You know him, Jeff Quazzo. And Jeff Quazzo was a friend of our family, a very good friend of my oldest daughter at one time in Bible college. And it went different directions, and God was obviously in all of that. But we become good friends again.
Okay.
And we've never not been friends, but we took a walk in this last trip to Israel, and it was a trip where a team of us, primarily Calvary Chapel pastors, are doing 2 different pastors' conferences in Israel, one with Israeli pastors and one with Arabic-speaking pastors.
Wow.
And we were taking this walk one night, and Jeff said to me, Bill, you were the first person that ever asked me to go take a walk. And he said, I don't know, I'll probably choke up a bit here, but
okay.
He said, I probably told you the story, and not if he did, I didn't remember it. But he said that when I came and visited you guys on the way driving back to New Jersey, and stayed at your house for a couple of nights. He said, that first night you said, let's go take a walk. And I had a certain reason I wanted to take a walk with him and talk with him about some stuff. But he said, you just asked me questions about who I was. You asked me questions about what my ministry focus was and what my hope for my life was. And he said that was probably the first level of mentoring I ever had, was you just saying, let's take a walk and let's talk. Yeah. And with this passion that I have to be involved in the lives of other leaders right now, whether they're young or older leaders, I was struggling with what kind of format, what's this going to look like? And I said, Jeff, you just set the focus for me on taking a walk. I love to walk.
Yep.
I said, just taking a walk with somebody else.
What's the secret to your discipleship success?
Yeah.
Take a walk.
Yeah, let's go for a walk.
Yeah, because that's what it is. We're all on a walk with the Lord. And so I mean that seriously. It just kind of pushed to the back all that fear about, am I qualified to be a mentor? Am I qualified to be a pastoral mentor? So I can't wait to see what this looks like.
I find it encouraging that you ask yourself that question, because I feel like you, of all people, are qualified to be a mentor. So it's so getting back to missions. You're a world traveler. You've been to Israel three times this year.
Yeah.
You're not slowing down anytime soon. In fact, you're working on someone else at the church there. You'll have more time to travel, you think?
Yeah.
Visit Florida?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah,
would love to come back here.
So many reasons to visit.
Yeah, two really good ones.
That's right.
That's right.
But kind of your first experience, I think, overseas, you can clarify, was to Down Under. Australia.
I'd visited a few other countries.
I did.
Yeah, it was
very
good.
well done.
I'd visited some other countries before we moved to Australia, but I had, probably by that time, I'd stepped foot in, aside from, Mexico's important too, but along with Mexico.
That's like the shallow end of the pool, you get your feet wet.
But culturally, it's frightening to me because you don't get as far speaking English down there as you do in Australia.
Exactly.
That's true.
But Australia was the first real submersion in another culture.
Mexico, I feel like, is a great place because it is a different culture, different language, everything, but it's close enough to where it's kind of an easy trip, especially if you're going across the border.
Do a weekend.
You can do it quickly.
It's easier
cheap.
If you're coming out of Mexico right now to get across the border, I hear.
Oh, really?
Just
I've sat in that line in
but you can't
Tijuana
just walk
for like
across.
4 hours one time.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
But they sell you the stuff on the Dora the Explorer stuff.
I was making a political comment, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, were you? Okay.
You can edit that out.
It just went right over my head. How come your podcast got banned on the first episode?
Right.
Oh, well.
We've got it back there with Zucalele's Instagram.
Yeah, right.
What's your new Instagram?
My temporary Instagram is Brukulele. So it's ukulele with a BR on the beginning.
Okay, we'll search for you. Can we search just your name, Bill Welsh? And then
yes, I think so.
I think we might have set him up for that.
We might have set that up. Yeah.
Okay, so jumping over to the other side of the world.
Right.
Literally the farthest corners of the earth.
Mm-hmm. It was about 8,000 miles away from California.
And that was in what year?
Started going there in 1987. I'm a musician too, and did some songwriting and would go into schools.
We're going to have you back on another podcast to do one about music, worship, and the like.
But I started going down there in 1987 in our northern summer, which was their winter in the South. And through a Youth with a Mission friend, Peter Turvey, who now lives in California, he opened up some doors. Yep. And it was... I think it was right after the LA Olympics. We got connected with each other, and I called him and I felt like, hey, Peter, I think it's time to take this step. He said, well, let me set up an itinerary for you. So with a couple of churches in the Melbourne area and a couple of schools and a community concert, and then went up to Sydney. So we did that in 87, 88, 89, and 90, and then we moved there in 91 as a family.
Wow.
first year it was just my wife Joy and I and our son Jeremy.
Yep.
And we left our 2 older daughters, Shannon and Bethany, and our baby, Starlin, who wasn't a year old yet. And that little girl took her first steps while we were gone.
Oh, no.
I don't remember that.
There are those little sacrifices you make, though. I mean, and big ones, too.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving over 1991, and your goal was to plant a church.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was to plant a church that was in the Calvary Chapel family.
Yep.
And there were a handful of Calvary Chapel ministries in Australia on both the East Coast and the West Coast. And so we talked to them about the possibility of getting sponsored, and neither one of them were able to do that because they were kind of at the limit of how many people they could sponsor with the size church.
Oh, you mean the government, like the government sponsorship and stuff?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was to get a Christian workers visa that was to go in and work with them, and then maybe in time branch out and plant.
Did you have to do that in New Zealand when you guys moved there?
Yeah, so we lived in New Zealand for 2 years, and I remember getting your advice about moving to New Zealand too, because
Wow.
it's down under.
Was
I
it
remember
accurate?
Lynn calling me like, "Did it ruin you when your parents moved to Australia?" I was like, "No, I loved it."
I loved it. We did have to get a work visa, but it was easier for us than I'm sure for you, because we didn't go to plant a church, but we went to take over an existing Calvary Chapel that was there in Auckland.
But that Brian Hughes.
Brian Hughes, yep.
Hughes, yeah.
Yeah, so he was retiring, and he, through a mutual friend, called me up, and it worked out perfectly. We were just in a transition out of our church plant in Washington State. And, I mean, we're like, New Zealand, we'll have to pray about that.
Well, let me see.
Beautiful country. Wow.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, gorgeous.
Yeah. And
But
they have
you had-
hobbits there, too.
Yeah, they do.
Right. But we ended up getting sponsored into Australia not by a Calvary, but by
Right.
an Anglican church.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
It was one of the first churches that I worked with on every trip that we took going over, short trips, 2 weeks to a month. This Anglican church, which was a kind of a spirit-filled Anglican church with a real focus on evangelism. And the pastor was visiting us in California, in the desert there. He said, I'll never forget this conversation, how's your search for the sponsorship going? I said, well, nothing's coming through. He said, well, let us sponsor you. I said,
Wow.
well, that's really generous of you, but I know that God's calling us to come and plant a Calvary Chapel fellowship. He said, well, you can do that. You can even start it when you come, but just serve with us for a year.
Okay.
And do worship and some missions and outreach. And
So when you were planning to go over and plant, I mean, what kind of went through your mind, and what was your vision, I guess, about going there? Just kind of see what happens, or did you have a specific goal in mind?
I didn't know how it was going to work, but I felt like we just seek the Lord and target a community or a suburb or whatever, wherever it was, and then just somehow make our presence known with neighbors and maybe some more outreaches in schools and just see how this went. But that Anglican church, they were so incredibly generous. They said, well, they asked me, well, where do you think you're going to do this? I said, probably out in the southeast suburbs, and nobody will recognize it.
Was that Melbourne?
Yeah,
Yep.
in Melbourne. So the southeast was cities like in Endeavour Hills and Dandenong and some cool,
Berwick.
Aussie names.
What's
Berwick.
the population of Melbourne? Is it?
I think
couple
it's
million?
now over 4. It was over 3 at that point. Now I think it's about 4.
So it's a pretty big city.
And Sydney's maybe
Call
5.
it a big one.
Yeah. But the pastor of that church said, well, if that's the area that you're really targeting, we've got a lot of people in our fellowship, Christ Church. The name of the town was Dingley.
Dingley.
Yeah.
Nice.
And why don't you just take
Gonna go to Dingley, mate?
Dingley.
And
Oi, oi,
it was
oi.
a beautiful family of people too. But they said, why don't you just contact these people and let them know you're starting a fellowship down there and see if they want to help you, see if they want to
Nice.
connect with you. And what pastor does that?
Yeah.
And especially if it's out of your
Denomination
grid.
or network. Yeah, exactly.
So Rob
That's so
Isaacson,
good.
Rob and Lois, precious people.
That's so good. I found it, just living on the mission field, a lot of those differences that we have in the States that are seemingly so significant. Once you get out on the mission field and there's work to do, some of those kind of like you're able to work together a little bit easier.
That's right. That's what worked for us.
So going over with church planting, let's go over there. Let's plant a church. First of all, first things first, we need to get that permit.
Yeah.
And you got it.
Yeah, you have to legally get in. You can sneak in, but your time's going to be limited.
Oh, wow.
You want a long-standing relationship. What were the most difficult things? Getting in was difficult. What else?
I would say, one of the question marks was always: are we going to be effective at reaching people? Are we going to bridge the culture? I think one of the hardest things, and really one of the most critical things, is realizing you are going into another culture. They might speak your language, and you won't have a really hard time understanding them.
Hey, that's good.
And, that's really good.
But if you're in Melbourne, you're going to go out. Let's go get some fish and chips, mate.
Yeah.
If you're in New Zealand, it's fish and chips.
Fish and chips, yeah.
But
Totally is.
and the language is the least of those, because there was what I would call a deceptively similar culture.
Yep. I'll never forget that, and I was going to bring that up if you didn't, because when I was talking to you, you said that to
Did
me.
I use that term? Yeah.
Yes, you would use that exact term, deceptively similar, as far as culture.
Yeah.
Because when we were in Uganda, it wasn't very similar. It was different in
Completely
almost every
different.
way.
Except language, right? You could.
Except for language, yeah.
And language was the second. English was the second language.
English was the national language of Uganda.
Oh, okay.
So it's the school language and everything, government language. But everybody spoke their tribal language first.
Okay.
But there were so many tribes that they would all have different first languages. So second language was English. And then East African language is Swahili. So all the surrounding countries were Swahili. So everybody you met in Uganda generally spoke at least 3 languages.
Wow.
So we think
amazing.
we think of these countries like, oh, they're just, these developing nations. We need to go help them. A lot of them are probably, smarter in many
than we are.
ways than we are. So.
Yeah.
But deceptively similar.
Yeah, and I think it's wise. I'm not sure I did this well enough, but having conversations with, I guess you could call them the natives or the locals, and learning their culture.
Loincloth, yeah.
Learning their culture, and even and literally, I'm serious about this one. Learn their language, even if it's English, and sit down and I tell people to do this. Maybe we talked about this. When you go into another land, ask them, what words should I never say?
Yeah.
And there were a handful of words in Australia that you would never say from the pulpit.
Yep.
And because
don't say them here, because we might get
I won't.
expletive.
I know.
We
might get a bad review.
Distribute in Australia.
Because you literally would be cursing. You'd be using a.
Even though they're words that we would not find offensive.
No, not at all.
In English here.
I have a question. What makes it difficult? What made it difficult because it was deceptively similar? Like, do you think it's easier to go to a place that's deceptively similar as opposed to a place that's like glaringly different?
Yeah, here's one. And this is, again, back in Israel, leading hiking tours and leading what we call bus tours or traditional tours. You're always working with a guide who's a local. And they have a very different pattern in conversation that can almost sound like I think they hate me. I think they're really angry right now, but they're not. You're walking through the market and you get into a sort of a dickering conversation over a pair of shoes you want to buy or a souvenir, and you can think they must really not like me. But it's just the way they talk. And I think I crossed that bridge in one of our last tours where I had to push back against a guide who I really love. I love this young man. He's so full of life and passion when he's talking about anything. And he wanted to talk to us a lot about geology. Well, we don't take people over there to talk that much about geology, but it was just an adjustment we had to make. So. And so those kind of things where you learn their pattern in conversation and you learn sort of their level of what could appear to be aggression in a conversation, and it's just not. It's just the way that they talk on a daily basis.
I talked about that the other day with someone in talking about church planting, that really, even if you're church planting in Florida or Washington State or California, wherever you may be, if it's different from where you're used to or where you grew up, or that, you're really going into a mission field. You have to understand the differences. Florida's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say, Shannon?
Yeah, totally. And do you feel like you, in that instance that you're describing, like it's your job to default, like to allow that to come to the forefront? Like you're joining them, not asking them to join you in the way that you are.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. Because it's like, that's the arrogance of missionaries a lot of times.
Right.
Like, here I come with my, and that's what they did back in
like
the day.
the Crusades.
Yeah. And even further on in the missionary century, hey. And in the 1800s and everything, they would come in with the English culture because it was advanced and superior. And now, in order to be a Christian, you have to wear this kind of clothes. And that's why Hudson Taylor had such success in China, because he didn't really do that.
He became as much like them as he possibly could.
Exactly. And that's church planting too. I just want our listeners to know that's not just missions, but there's a real overlap of be sensitive to the culture you're entering and learn. What I hear you saying is learn that, especially the differences in language and the way people talk.
Yeah. Did it take you a while to feel like you had been accepted by the people of Uganda that you were ministering
Uganda,
to?
yes. And it was a great country because they had a love for the United States and for United States culture. And respect and that sort of thing.
So you already kind of had like a...
We already had like an high approval rating, but there was a difference between that and actually being accepted into their culture. And to be honest with you, and I said this to someone the other day, that you'll never really be able to be one of them, because a lot of times missionaries or church planters go in and say, I just want to be one with the people, whether maybe it's an inner city urban thing. I'm going to be an inner city guy. He grew up on the farm in Kansas his whole life, but now I'm a city boy, and there's always going to be a difference. But I think there is that, to your point, that level where they will accept you and at least understand we can be open with you and honest with you because we know you're not judgmental of our culture, of the way we do things. You're here to learn. I think the more I look into it, the more I realize humility is one of the greatest things a church planter can have.
Love and humility. You approach people.
That's why I
with love.
appreciate you so much, Pastor Bill. Your dad's a humble guy.
He is.
Yeah.
I
Most
think
of
it's
the time.
more
Tell
valuable.
us about a prideful time in his life so he doesn't. No. Oh, I'm just kidding.
It was a transforming time, actually, the one that came into my mind. But I think what you're describing is there's a lot of value. What I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of value in saying, I'm a farm guy, but I'm in the city now. And not trying to pretend like, no, I'm just like you guys. Like, we're bros, It's just coming in and respecting the differences and being a lifelong learner. And that's where humility comes into play. Like, I'm not a city person, but I'm not a farm person either. I guess I'm a suburbia person.
I feel like a lot of these, especially young guys, like I almost said like me. I'm not a young.
Oh, I know. It's so
yes,
sad.
you are.
Okay, thank you. I was looking for that.
I like
I was
how
waiting for
I
that.
agreed with him, and you're like, no.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Can we mute her mic?
Yeah, exactly.
But I feel like there's a kind of it's cool to church plant now, and so they're all saying, what should we do? And we're listening to the podcast. I mean, we're doing a podcast, so we're reading the books, and it's almost like they're trying to plug in this formula of like, what should I wear? How many tattoos should I have? How should I do what hat should I be wearing? And it's almost like it's not who they are, a lot of these guys. So, and don't you feel like people can see right through that?
I think
feel
so.
like it can.
You know what I call that, Brian? To me, that's approaching church planting with a franchise mentality.
Yeah.
That you're going to come in, you're going to plant the franchise. And there's a poem that really illustrates this. And Shannon will remember this poem. It's not a Bible poem, but it's about God. And so one day God says to me with a smile, how would you like to be God for a while and rule the world? Okay, says I'll give it a try. Where do I sit? How much do I get? What time is lunch and when do we quit? And then at the end of the poem, Shel Silverstein is the one that wrote that, the guy that did the Giving Tree.
Okay.
He says, give me the wheel, you're not quite ready yet. And so when someone comes in with this vision of, I'm going to be the guy in charge, I'm going to be the captain of this ship, and I wonder what my salary will be, and I wonder,
Right.
those kind of things.
Surprise.
Like,
How many thousands of people are going to be there in the first
Yeah.
6
Oh, yeah.
months?
yeah, but when you come in like a servant that we're all meant to be under, our servant King Jesus, and you just serve the people that are in front of you.
That's right.
And there's almost become like a mantra at Refuge. And I had wondered for a while, is anybody catching this? Has this impacted anybody like it did for me when we were studying through the Gospel of Luke, and I came to the familiar story of the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
And so he comes and he's got a question. And he says, "How can I get to heaven, or how can I have eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Well, you know the Bible. Why don't you tell me?" And he says, "Well, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor." And Jesus says, he doesn't say, "Yeah, that's the way to get to heaven," but he says, "Well, why don't you go do that?" And he says, "Yeah, but who's my neighbor?" and it says he said that to justify himself.
Yeah.
So whatever the backstory is there, he's maybe feeling bad about somebody he dissed. And now the question is different. The question is, who's my neighbor? And he basically comes down to this, the story. He says 2 guys pass him by, and the Samaritan stops and helps the guy. It doesn't say he preached to him, but he helps him. And Jesus says, "Well, why don't you go do that?" And I remember the moment that it hit me that what God wants me to do for the rest of my life is to stop for the people that are in the middle of my road that day, that moment. And I still feel like that defines what ministry here on this planet is, to stop and to look into the eyes of and to help somebody who's been, like in the story, has been beat up, robbed, stripped, and left for dead in the middle of the road. And just be an answer to them in any way that you can. So I think if I can approach my day like that and just stop for the woman who's in the middle of my road every single day, my lovely bride Joy, and then whatever other people he leads to me. And of course, that doesn't say anything about what we do in the pulpit and all that, but
That's the heart of it.
it is.
That's the heart of it.
I think it
Okay,
is.
I'm going to ask this to everyone who comes on the show about church planting. What do you know now that you wish you would have known back then when you were planting a church? What is that one thing where you thought, "Oh, if I only knew this back then"? Sorry, I didn't give you the question
No,
ahead of
no.
time,
It's
but
better.
it's better this way.
Yes.
I think that one is what I just said. I wish I would have realized that the one person on that one day was just as important as what I would say from a pulpit for far too long. I mean, I talk too long, is what I'm saying. But just to realize that and because I remember one moment, a guy that came to me and he was pouring out his heart, and it was one of those very difficult conversations. And I remember how I answered him that day, and it wasn't great. And I remember I said to him, "John, you wear me out."
Yeah.
That's not what he needed to hear that day.
No.
And it was wearing me out. Because I'm thinking, I have no idea how to solve that problem you just laid out for me. But I could have been a better friend at that moment for him.
Yeah.
And it was one of those kind of moments where you think, this is not what I signed up for. But it was what I signed up for, if I'd only known that.
That's right. I had a
So-
few of those these last week, so
Oh,
that's a good
It's
word
tough.
for me.
it's tough. But I feel like you were saying that, I can't remember how you worded it, but people who are like, "Yeah, I'm going to plant a church, and how many tattoos do I need?" Da, 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 da. And if it doesn't, there's, like you had said at the church planting conference we had, and it was huge for me, was that one of the main things is managing expectations. And I think that if you're going into it like a little trepidation, like, "Lord, really? Like, is this really what you're calling me to do?" Like, it's a big responsibility.
Kicking and screaming like you did going to Refuge. What did you say? The heel marks all the
Heel
way from
marks all-
Albuquerque?
Yeah.
right across
I
the-
mean, I feel like there's a
yeah.
mountain of holy fear of, okay, and you've done it before, so you know what's required.
I know it's not an easy thing.
And so I think that
I know this is your church planning podcast, but you all need to hear this.
You
It's
better
not-
be ready.
It's not an easy thing.
And another thing I think I would have done too was to purposely to build a team, to build a real team mentality and a family vibe between the people that are working with us. But it would be wonderful to go out with another couple. It'd be
Yeah.
great to go out,
Yeah.
not just 2 by 2 with another brother, but another family that really shares
having
that
a
heart.
nice core team of family members, church family. Yeah, we have that here, thankfully, and Shannon and Jesse are part of it now. And it's just like any family, you know, you have your little family things, but to have those people.
Right. And I am so blessed for you and Lynn. And your family that you have, Jesse and Shannon. I really am.
We appreciate it. We know it's
proud of these guys.
Yeah, they're awesome. Any last words, Pastor Bill, that you want to share with us? Some wisdom that you have? I mean, it's been good. Humility, I think, is that theme.
And I think that's what I see in my dad is like I was last night after he did the shepherd here, somebody was like, oh, your dad just seems like such a tender, like a gentle man. And I was like, he is. I said, what I've always appreciated about my dad is who you see on the pulpit is that's my dad. There's not a different man who preaches from the pulpit. The very same personality, character, humility is the same as who my dad is.
Oh, gosh.
That's good stuff.
I don't know him as good as you do,
but humility is something.
To that.
I think something I've always appreciated about my dad too is, you know, when he's sorry, I might cry now, but I'm just a tender, gentle woman. But I think it's, you know, if he would blow it or get upset with us or say something, you know, as a father, as a mother, like we say things to our kids where we're like, ugh, I really blew that. But he would always come to us and apologize and ask for our forgiveness and make it clear that that is not how I should have treated you. And it just made me feel like I was so valuable. Like I really, you know.
You are. Yeah.
Look at you, you're just between two blubbering.
I need to get some tissue. I'm going to cry. I'm crying.
I would put this down there too, Brian.
Okay.
And Psalm 42 is the deer pants for the water. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O Lord. And to always have just that heart for Jesus. And remember who it is that we get to represent. It's just remarkable. It's just so almost unbelievable that God would say, "Hey, Bill, I've got something for you to do for me and with me." I remember. I'll give you one of my favorite books on ministry, mission, pastoring, Love, Acceptance, and Forgiveness by Jerry Cook.
Okay.
It's still very available. Our team back in Huntington Beach is reading that together right now. But Jerry tells this story. It's obviously not a true story. But Jesus comes back to heaven after the resurrection. And the angels greet him and they say, "Amazing what you did. Just incredible what you did. What have you done to make sure that the world hears this?" And he said, "Well, I told all my friends. I told them to tell everybody they know."
Oh, wow.
And there's this moment of telling silence where the angels look at one another just, aghast and said, We've watched those guys. Surely you must have made some other plans." And Jesus says, "I've made no other plans." That we get to be his representatives here. Yeah. And that's an ominous task, an impossible task, if it weren't for the fact that he said, "I'll fill you with with the Holy Spirit."
That's it right there.
And you'll get it done.
That's it.
And I'll work with you.
And until we do that, he can't fully use
No,
us
I
the
know,
way that he should.
because we're just a bunch of dummies.
We are. Yeah. Prideful dummies.
No other plans, Jesus? Nope.
Nope.
This is it.
Yep.
And what a joke that we would try to make celebrities out of ourselves.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
How embarrassing we must be when we get to heaven. It's just like, oh.
Down in front. Down in front.
Have you ever? I've often wondered if Jesus would come walking into, or even Paul would come walking into, one of our congregations on a Sunday morning, and say, "So what exactly are you trying to do here?"
This is cute.
Yeah, what
it's like
is
a
this
kindergarten
place?
play.
Yeah, what is this place? Shannon, any last thoughts before we go?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think he covered it.
Pastor Bill, thank you so much for being on the show and those words of wisdom. I'm gonna listen to this again and again myself. And Shannon, thanks for being on, helping co-host today.
Well, thank you, Brian. I'm proud of you, man. I'm not your daddy, but if I were, I'd be telling you how proud I am
a
of you.
Spiritual father. I'll
for the way
receive
you
that.
follow Jesus around the world. Keep it up.
Amen.
Keep it up.
Amen.
You and Lynn are amazing.
All right. God bless you, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Cultivate Church Planting podcast. www.cultivatechurchplanting.com to get started. Yes.